Ava Collins never imagined that one careless second could decide her entire fate. She rushed through the cold marble hallway of Roland Medical late at night, clutching a small white box of prescription pills that could buy her grandmother a few more hours of sleep. She was barely breathing yet. Ava still had to finish another shift before the sun rose over Manhattan. The bright lights above flickered as nurses called out orders and monitors beeped behind half-closed curtains. Ava was nothing more than a temporary name on a temporary contract. But this building was her last hope. She turned the corner too fast. A heavy door swung open without warning. She slammed straight into someone tall and solid. The box flew from her hands, pills scattered, and her palm landed on something that made her freeze to her bones. For half a breath, she heard only her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then came the low voice, calm, yet sharp as glass, cutting through every excuse she wanted to make. "Did you think touching me there would get you anywhere?" Miss Collins' Ethan Rowland's eyes locked on hers with a coldness she had never seen in any human before. CEO of Roland Medical Corp., the man whose name alone could hire or fire half the city. His black suit was flawless, except for the wrinkle where her fingers had grabbed him by accident. His jaw tightened so hard, she thought it might shatter from holding back the anger in his veins. "I'm sorry, sir. It was an accident." I swear her voice cracked, but she forced herself to stand straight, her knees trembling as she looked down and saw the pills rolling under his polished shoes. Ethan stepped closer. His shadow swallowed hers under the harsh white lights. A few nurses stood frozen at the far end of the hallway. Not one dared to speak. Everyone knew you did not interrupt Ethan Rowland when he was about to crush someone for sport. One touch, you think you can climb that high with a single touch. His words were soft, but each syllable pressed into her throat like cold steel. Ava shook her head, trying to explain, but nothing made sense when her stomach was twisting itself into knots. "Please, I didn't mean my patient needs these," she whispered. Dropping to her knees, she gathered the scattered pills with trembling hands. Her fingers slipped on the smooth marble, but she would not cry, not here, not in front of the man who looked at her like dirt on imported leather. Ethan bent down his face close enough for her to see the faint roughness of his stubble and the hidden shadow behind his sharp gaze. He picked up one pill between two fingers, placed it in her palm. His touch cold, but the heat from his skin spread through hers like a tiny electric shock that made her forget how to breathe. "You will pay Miss Collins in ways you cannot even imagine." Yet he murmured so low, only she could hear it. Then he stood, turned away, leaving only the echo of his footsteps and the weight of what he had promised. The nurses turned back to their screens, pretending nothing happened. The hallway swallowed the tension, but Ava could still feel it pounding in her chest as she forced herself to her feet, clutching the tiny box, like it was her only shield in a war she did not know she had entered. "One touch, one stupid, accidental touch," she whispered to herself as she stumbled toward her patient's room. The pills rattling with every step. She could not afford to lose this job, could not afford to lose anything more. But deep inside her mind, a voice whispered back that nothing would ever be the same again. Ava Collins had never truly belonged anywhere in this polished world of white marble floors and expensive cologne drifting through the air like a silent threat. She came from a cramped apartment in a forgotten corner of Brooklyn where the paint peeled off the walls and every winter the heat barely worked. Her grandmother Ruth was all she had left in the world, a fragile heartbeat that tied Ava to this city no matter how cold it got outside. Every night she wore the same pale blue uniform, moving like a shadow through the endless corridors of Roland Medical, the biggest private medical corporation in Manhattan, a place where people whispered about miracles if you could pay enough. But for girls like Ava, there were no miracles, only 12-hour shifts and overdue bills that piled up no matter how many times she skipped dinner. Ethan Rowland did not belong in her world. He belonged to the penthouse suites towering over Fifth Avenue, the charity galas where men in suits spoke softly of mergers and families hid their cruelty behind silver cutlery and polite applause. At 32, he was already known as the man who rebuilt Rowland Medical after his father's sudden death. Some admired him as a genius who turned cold profit into a living empire. Others feared him because he trusted no one and smiled at nothing. It was said that Ethan never touched anyone, not because he thought he was too good, but because something inside him refused warmth. Rumors whispered that he was incapable of feeling desire, incapable of producing an heir that behind the closed doors of the Rowland estate doctors had tried and failed to fix him, and when they could not, they sealed the files, and the family sealed the truth. The Rowland family was old money built on hospitals, pharmaceuticals, and secrets locked in vaults bigger than some city apartments. At the top of it all sat Henry, Rowland Ethan's grandfather, a man whose word could crush companies overnight. His only wish before he died was to see the Rowland name continue through blood. His voice echoed through every corridor. If Ethan could not give him a grandson, then power would pass to Gregory. Ethan's uncle, a man with soft words and hard eyes, the kind of man who shook your hand while checking your pulse for weakness. Gregory's hands had been everywhere lately, planting doubts inside boardrooms, bribing doctors like Harris to spread the rumor that Ethan Rowland was frigid in more ways than one. The more the rumor spread, the weaker Ethan's grip became, the more eager the shareholders grew to see the young CEO bend or break. The more Charlotte Gray smiled when she stepped through the front doors, pretending to be the future Mrs. Rowland Charlotte, with her perfect hair and father's political influence, who believed Ethan's coldness was only a matter of time and strategy. She would give Henry the grandchild he wanted and Gregory the puppet he needed. But none of that mattered to Ava. She only knew Ethan Rowland as a name on the top of every payslip that barely covered her rent to her. He was just another powerful stranger she would never speak to, until her hand slipped that night, until the cold of his suit burned her palm more than any fire could now. Every time she blinked, she saw his eyes sharp and questioning, as if he was trying to decide whether to crush her or keep her within arm's reach, like an inconvenient truth. Back in her small apartment, Ava tiptoed around stacks of medical bills and plastic pill bottles. Her grandmother's breathing was the only sound that filled the silence every day. She promised Ruth that things would get better, that this city would not eat them alive the way it had eaten her parents when the debt collectors came knocking and took everything but a young girl and an old woman who clung to life because Ava still called her grandma. Some nights, Ava dreamed of escaping Manhattan, of warm places with no marble floors or cold eyes watching her every mistake. But every morning she woke up and put on the uniform again because hope was expensive and leaving cost more than staying. So she stayed, and she survived, and she promised herself that no man in a black suit and sharper words would ever make her beg for mercy. Not even Ethan Rowland. Not even when he looked at her like she was nothing more than an accident waiting to happen. Somewhere in the corner of the city, Light's Ethan sat alone in his penthouse office, staring out at the city that he owned, but never trusted. He remembered the warmth of her touch, not because he wanted it, but because it terrified him that he had wanted it for the first time in years in his head. Gregory's voice hummed like poison. Charlotte's perfume clung to his sleeves. The ghost of his father's betrayal lingered in every polished surface. He clenched his jaw and whispered to the empty room that no girl from Brooklyn could bring him down, no matter what part of him she had touched. Ava stood at the end of the corridor the next night, staring at the polished brass plate on the heavy wooden door that separated her from Ethan Rowland. She had not planned to come back. She had planned to disappear into the endless stream of nurses and patients and emergency alarms that swallowed mistakes until they faded into someone else's story. But the hospital administrator's voice that afternoon still rang in her ears, cold and final, telling her that her hours had been cut with no explanation. Her name erased from the next month's shift list as if she had never existed. They did not say it, but everyone knew Ethan Rowland's displeasure had no limit and no mercy. She had promised her grandmother that she would bring home the new pills tonight. Pills the insurance did not cover, and Ruth needed them, or she would not sleep through the pain. So Ava found herself outside his office door, one trembling hand clutching the prescription slip, the other hand flat against her chest, trying to calm the panic that made her vision blur at the edges. She knocked once, waited, heard nothing, then pushed the door open and stepped inside, before her courage dissolved on the sterile floor. Ethan sat behind a wide black desk that seemed to swallow him in shadows, though the city lights glittered behind him through a wall of glass that turned his office into a throne. Above the world, he did not look up at first. His eyes locked on a document, but Ava saw the tightness in his shoulders, the slight twitch in his jaw, as if he had known she would come, yet still hated that she was here. When he finally lifted his gaze, the same cold eyes pinned her in place. She almost dropped the paper clutched between her fingers. "You have 1 minute, Miss Collins?" His voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that made her want to run. Yet she forced herself to stay rooted where she stood, her shoes barely brushing the thick carpet that probably cost more than everything in her apartment. "I need my hours back," she said, her voice shaking, but clear. "I need this job. Mr. Rowland, my grandmother is not well. I cannot pay for her treatment without this work. Please?" Ethan's fingers drummed once on the edge of the desk, the only sound between them besides the distant hum of the city. He rose, slowly walked around the desk, stopping so close that she could see the faint shadows under his eyes, the lines of exhaustion carved deep into a face that should have looked untouched by anything human. "Do you think your apology buys back what you took from me?" he asked. Though his tone did not rise, did not break it, just pressed the air tighter around her throat. "You touched me, Miss Collins. You took from me in a way no one has for years. Do you know what that means?" Ava shook her head. She could not answer because the words made no sense yet. The heat behind his gaze made her stomach twist with something that felt like fear, but deeper, heavier. Something that made her want to understand when she knew she should run. "I did not take anything, sir. It was an accident, I swear," she whispered, clutching the prescription slip so hard it crumpled against her palm. Ethan studied her in silence for what felt like hours, his eyes flicking to the paper, then back to her face as if measuring her for a punishment or something else she could not name. "You want your hours back?" he said finally, each word measured slow, then earned them. He added, his voice softer than it had any right to be. "You will work directly for me from now on. No more shifts, no more wards. You will report here every night until I say otherwise." Ava stared at him, the words refusing to fit inside her head. "What do you mean, work for you?" "I am a nurse, sir." "I am not some—" He cut her off with a low sound, not quite a laugh, more like a warning. "You think too highly of your innocence, Miss Collins. You broke something inside me the moment you touched me. You will fix it, or you will pay for it." She stepped back, bumping into the edge of the desk. The city lights behind him turned his figure into a silhouette of sharp edges and cold promises. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely more than breath. "I don't know how to fix anything like that." Ethan's hand lifted, but did not touch her. It hovered near her cheek, close enough that she felt the heat of his skin, close enough that her heartbeat stuttered against her ribs. Then he pulled back, as if the effort cost him more than she could see. "You will learn, Miss Collins. You want your grandmother to sleep tonight. You will learn. She left his office that night with a new badge clipped to her uniform that allowed her access to the top floor and a single vial of medicine tucked deep in her pocket. She rode the subway home, half convinced she had made a deal with something she did not understand, half terrified that she had just traded her freedom for her grandmother's fragile breaths. Yet when she stepped through the door of their tiny apartment and saw Ruth sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, Ava told herself she would survive this too. She always survived. The next nights blurred together. Ethan never touched her yet. His presence pressed closer every time she walked into his office. Sometimes she found him at the window, staring down at the city like a king surveying a kingdom he could not trust. Sometimes he sat with his eyes closed, head tilted back, as if he could sleep only when she was there. Ava did not understand what she was meant to do. Some nights, he ordered her to sit across from him and read medical files out loud, as if her voice alone was part of the cure. Other nights he asked her questions about her life, questions that made no sense coming from a man who ruled entire hospital wings, yet wanted to know whether she liked the snow, whether she missed Brooklyn, whether she ever thought of leaving the city behind. One night, after too many hours of silence, Ethan asked her if she was afraid of him. Ava thought about lying, but the truth slipped out before she could stop it. I am more afraid of losing my grandmother than I am of you, she said. The honesty cracked something in his expression for a moment so brief, she almost believed she imagined it. One evening, when a storm raged outside and the glass walls of his office trembled with thunder, Ethan stood so close behind her that she felt the heat of his breath when he whispered, "Do you know why I can't feel anything? Do you know what it means when a man is alive but dead in every part that matters?" Ava turned to face him, her heart hammering so loud she was sure he heard it. She wanted to say she did not know, but the truth was, in his eyes, she saw it, the same shadow she carried every time she held her grandmother's hand in the dark. It was fear of losing something he did not believe he deserved. The next night, he did not come to the office. She waited for hours. The city outside, drowning in snow, until the only sound left was the echo of her own breath. She found him in a hidden corner of the hospital, sitting on a bench in the dark, staring at a photo he kept folded so tight the edges had torn. When she sat beside him, Ethan did not look up. He told her about the mother who had given up everything for the Roland name, and the father who had thrown it all away for another woman. How that betrayal had broken him so early that he no longer believed in touch and warmth. In wanting Ava, listened in silence, her fingers inches from his hand, but she did not reach for him because she knew now that he would pull away if she did. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were raw, not cold, not sharp, just exhausted. "You make me feel things I do not want to feel, Miss Collins," he said, his voice a whisper that trembled like her hands when she thought about what this all meant. She wanted to tell him that she did not know how to fix a man like him. She was just a nurse, a girl from Brooklyn, a nobody. But when his fingers brushed hers for a single second, she realized maybe she did not have to fix him. Maybe all she had to do was stay. Ava did not know when she started to see the patterns in the walls of Roland Medical. The hidden looks, the hushed conversations that stopped when she passed too close. Some nights she would catch Dr. Harris slipping into Ethan's private wing, his coat pockets heavy with sealed files that no one else was allowed to touch. The nurses whispered that Ethan's Uncle Gregory had been seen late at night meeting with men who wore expensive suits and carried secrets like briefcases. Ava did not want to know these things, but she had a way of noticing what people tried to hide. Maybe it was because she had spent her entire life watching for the small cracks that let the truth slip through, like light through a broken window. One evening, when Ethan was called away for a board meeting that dragged past midnight, Ava stayed behind to wait. She sat at his wide desk, leafing through harmless folders to keep her mind from spiraling. She was not supposed to look too closely, but something caught her eye, an envelope half tucked beneath a ledger. Her name was not on it, but the corner had a mark. She recognized. It was the same symbol on the sealed bag of medicine Ethan had given her for Ruth that first night. Her curiosity won over her caution. She slipped the paper out. Her heart thudded harder with every line she read. The report said Ethan Rowland was medically incapable of fathering a child, sterile. The word glared back at her in sharp black letters stamped by Dr. Harris's signature. But beside the official note, there was another page, handwritten notes, scribbled hastily, margins crowded with corrections, the dates did not match. The test results changed from one line to the next. The more she read, the more she felt the cold sweat crawl down her spine. This was not medicine. This was a lie she knew enough from her training to understand how blood results were marked. She saw the same tests repeated with conflicting data, and she understood suddenly how power could twist even the clean white walls of a hospital into something rotten. She heard footsteps in the hallway, the hush of expensive shoes on marble. Her pulse jumped. She shoved the pages back where she found them, wiped her fingerprints with the sleeve of her uniform, then sat perfectly still when the door swung open. Ethan stood there, his tie loose, his hair slightly damp from the winter air. He looked at her the way he always did, unreadable. But tonight, there was something under the cold and exhaustion that clung to him like a second skin. "You are still here?" He said it more as a fact than a question. Ava nodded, her hands folded neatly on her lap. She wanted to scream that she knew, but she said nothing. Instead, she asked him softly whether he was all right. Ethan walked past her, sat down heavily in the chair opposite hers, his shoulders bent in a way she had never seen before. "The board wants me to marry Charlotte Gray," he said. The words tasted bitter, even when spoken quietly. "They think the rumors about me can be contained. If there is a wife and a child, they want a bloodline." More than a leader, Ava did not know what to say, so she told the truth. "I do not believe you are what they say." Ethan flinched, as if her words had struck a place raw and hidden. "You should believe it. Miss Collins, I have spent years believing it myself, until you—" He did not finish the sentence. Instead, he stood abruptly, moving to the window. The city lights threw his reflection back at him, fractured across the glass. He raised one hand, pressed his palm to the cold surface. His breath fogged the window as he said softly, "You broke something the night you touched me, and I hate you for it, because I do not know how to want this, but I want it anyway." Ava wanted to tell him about the papers about Dr. Harris, but fear sealed her lips. She knew how powerful men could destroy someone like her with a single word. So she waited for the right moment. Yet the right moment never came, because the next day, Charlotte Gray arrived unannounced. Her heels clicked sharply on the marble as she entered Ethan's office without knocking. She wore confidence like perfume. Her eyes slid over Ava as if she were invisible. Charlotte's lips curved in a smile that never reached her eyes. "I hope I am not interrupting." She purred. Ethan's expression froze. The mask slipped back over his features. Ava saw it happen like a door slamming shut. She lowered her gaze to the floor, fighting the tremor in her hands as Charlotte leaned close enough to brush her manicured fingers against Ethan's sleeve. "The board thinks you need someone who knows how to handle the press," she said, "and someone who knows how to give you what you cannot give yourself." She glanced at Ava, then back at Ethan, her smile sharp. "I see you have your charity case here. How sweet." Ava forced herself to stand, her voice surprisingly steady when she said, "Excuse me, Mr. Rowland, I should get back to the ward." Ethan's eyes snapped to hers. Something like regret flickered there, but he did not speak. Ava slipped past Charlotte, the smell of expensive perfume lingering like poison. She kept her chin up until she reached the elevator. Only then did she let her hands shake. The truth pressed against her ribs. She knew what Gregory and Charlotte were planning. If they could trap Ethan in a marriage, they would control the Roland name, and if they could convince the world he was sterile, they could destroy him from the inside out. That night, Ava walked home through snow that soaked her thin shoes through to the bone. She sat by Ruth's bed, holding her grandmother's frail hand. As she whispered her worries into the darkness, Ruth stirred only once to press Ava's cold fingers to her lips. Her voice a rasp of warmth that Ava clung to. "You do not have to save the world alone, baby. Sometimes you just have to tell the truth and let it burn." Ava thought of Ethan, his tired eyes, his broken voice, the cold office that felt more like a cage than a throne. She thought of the fake reports, the way Charlotte looked at him like property. She knew she had to do something, even if it cost her what little she still owned of her freedom. 2 days later, Ava stayed late pretending to sort files for the night shift. She waited until Dr. Harris left his office, then slipped inside his private records room. Her heart thundered with every click of the keyboard as she found the real files, the ones Harris had hidden from the official system. The test results told a different story. Ethan was not incapable, the data proved it. Ava downloaded every page onto a small drive she had hidden in her shoe. Just as she slipped the drive into her pocket, she heard voices outside. Gregory's smooth tone dripped with false concern. Harris's voice trembled in reply. She pressed herself flat against the cabinet, praying they would not come in through the sliver of light under the door. She saw the shadows of expensive shoes. Gregory's laughter low and cold as he said, "If that nurse gets in the way again, make sure she understands accidents can happen here. No one asks too many questions." Ava waited until they left the hallway, then ran all the way down 6 flights of stairs, clutching the flash drive like it was her last breath. She did not go home that night. Instead, she found herself outside Ethan's building. Her fingers numb as she pressed the intercom. She expected no answer, but his voice came through the speaker, rough with sleep but clear. "Come up." She climbed the endless steps to his penthouse, each heartbeat a hammer against her ribs. When he opened the door, he looked at her like she was the last person he expected to see. Dripping snow melting from her hair onto his pristine floor. She held out the drive, her voice broke as she said, "I know the truth. They lied to you. They lied to everyone." Ethan stared at the small piece of plastic in her hand, then at her face, his eyes dark with questions and something else that looked dangerously like hope. Ethan took the flash drive from Ava's trembling hand, without a word. His eyes flicked to the door behind her, as if to check if someone had followed her. Then back to her face, searching for a lie he could not find. She felt the weight of that look deep in her chest, a silent question asking whether she was ready for what came next. She was not ready, but she nodded anyway. He led her inside the penthouse, an expanse of glass and steel so clean it looked untouched by ordinary life. Ava stood awkwardly on the cold marble floor as Ethan plugged the drive into his laptop. She watched the flicker of light on his face as pages and pages of data bloomed on the screen. Test results, appointments forged, signatures, notes from Dr. Harris, proving that the lie had been carefully built over years, layer by layer, to make Ethan doubt himself, to make the board doubt him, to make everyone believe that the Roland bloodline would end with him. Ava's throat burned with the truth that had nowhere to go but out. She told him everything she had overheard, the threats, the payments, the whispered deals between Gregory and Harris, and Charlotte's smug smile when she talked about heirs and contracts. And heirs again. She told him how she had found the files, how she had run through the hospital with the tiny drive hidden in her shoe, like a criminal carrying stolen gold. Ethan did not interrupt. He barely moved except for the slow curl of his hands into fists at his sides. She thought he might shatter the glass coffee table with one blow. But when he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet it made her shiver. "You should not have done this, Miss Collins. They will come for you now." Ava stepped closer until she could see the sharp shadows under his eyes, the way his shoulders strained under the perfect fabric of his shirt. "I could not watch you believe their lies any longer," she said, her voice soft but strong. Her fingers itched to reach for him, but she did not dare. "You deserve to know the truth, even if it destroys everything." Ethan's laugh was low, harsh, like a cut that refused to bleed. "The truth destroys nothing," he said. "It frees the pieces that should have burned long ago." He reached for her, then not quite touching, just letting his hand hover near her cheek until she leaned into it, her warmth meeting the cold he had carried so long. When his thumb brushed her skin, it felt like a promise she wanted to believe, but fear still coiled tight in her belly, because they both knew Gregory and Charlotte would not let this die quietly. That night, Ethan did not sleep. He called meetings that lasted until dawn, private investigators, security teams, trusted board members who owed him loyalty. Ava sat on the edge of the wide couch, her phone buzzing with missed calls from the hospital, asking why she had not shown up for her shift. She knew she could not go back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Ethan watched her from across the room, his eyes softer now than she had ever seen them. He crossed the space between them, sat beside her so close she felt his shoulder brush hers. "You should not be here," he said, his breath warm against her hair. "It is not safe." Ava lifted her head, her eyes burning with the exhaustion of too many nights without real rest. "Where else would I go?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "This is my fight too." Ethan's fingers tangled with hers for the first time, without hesitation or permission. "I do not want you to fight," he said. "I want you to be safe. You and your grandmother. You should not have to carry this." Ava turned, her hand in his grip, linking their fingers tighter. She wanted to tell him that she had carried worse alone for years, that his coldness had never scared her the way loneliness had. But the words tangled in her throat, and all she could manage was a soft promise. "Then do not ask me to leave you now." The next morning brought the storm they both knew was coming. Gregory arrived at Roland headquarters with Charlotte at his side, a ring glinting on her finger that she flaunted like a crown. The boardroom filled with gray suits and careful eyes that turned greedy when Gregory announced that Ethan was stepping down for health reasons, that his condition made him unfit to lead and unfit to continue the family name. Ava stood behind Ethan at the head of the long glass table. Her pulse thundered so loud she almost did not hear Ethan's voice. When he told Gregory to sit down, the room fell silent. Gregory's smirk cracked when Ethan slid a folder across the table, the same data Ava had handed him, but now printed in neat pages, stamped and notarized proof that the reports were forged, that the doctor they trusted was bought, that the lie they had fed the board was poison. Ethan's voice did not rise. It did not need to. It was cold, sharp, precise when he said this: "Ends now. Gregory, you have stolen from this family. You have lied to this company. You will answer for both." Charlotte tried to speak, her hand grasping Gregory's sleeve, but the security team moved faster, cutting off her words with quiet efficiency as they stepped forward to escort her out. The last thing Ava saw was Charlotte's eyes wide with disbelief as the door swung shut behind her. Ethan's gaze did not leave Gregory until the older man was forced to his feet by 2 guards and marched from the boardroom. The hush that followed was broken only by the soft click of the door closing and the shallow breaths Ava did not realize she was holding until Ethan turned to her, his eyes finding hers across the polished table. After the boardroom emptied, Ethan led Ava out through a side corridor. The weight of too many eyes following them, they stepped into the cold January air, the sky heavy with snow clouds that pressed down like secrets waiting to fall. He stopped under the wide stone archway that marked the Rowland building's entrance. His hand still wrapped around hers. His thumb brushed circles on her skin, grounding her in a way she had never expected. Ava opened her mouth to speak, but Ethan silenced her with a look that made her chest ache. "You have given me back something I did not know I could want again," he said, his voice rough around the edges. She felt the words settle deep under her ribs, warm and terrifying all at once. "I do not know how to be what you deserve, but I want to try." Ava lifted her free hand, pressing her cold fingers to his jaw, the faint stubble rough against her skin. She wanted to say she did not need him to be perfect. Only honest, only here, but the words were lost when he bent his head and kissed her, the cold wind biting at their cheeks while the city moved around them, unaware of the quiet promise sealed between a girl who had nothing and a man who had thought he had everything but found out he was wrong. They returned to Ethan's penthouse that night, the world outside buzzing with rumors and headlines that could not touch the silence they built inside. Ava sat by the wide window, her knees tucked to her chest, as she watched the city lights blur behind the glass. Ethan stood behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders when she leaned back into him. He did not flinch, did not pull away. His breath brushed her temple when he asked her to stay. Not just tonight, not just until the news died down, but stay in a way that turned the empty rooms into a home. Ava turned in his arms, lifting her eyes to his. There was fear there and hope, and something she had not dared to name until now. Maybe love, maybe the start of it, maybe the truth she had risked everything to find. Ava thought the worst was behind them when Gregory and Charlotte were dragged out of that boardroom, when the forged reports were exposed, and Ethan's right to stand at the head of his family's empire was sealed again. But the truth was that power never let go so easily, and secrets never died the moment the lights dimmed. The Rowland name brought shadows with it, shadows that knew how to wait for a moment of weakness to slip back in. She stayed with Ethan in the penthouse for nights that blurred together, filled with quiet moments that felt almost normal. Breakfast shared at dawn when Manhattan was still half asleep. Soft murmurs about her grandmother's health, her shift at the hospital that no longer belonged to her, yet she missed the hum of machines and the nurses who pretended not to stare. When Ethan Rowland's girl walked through the hallway with her head high, they called her that now as girl. But in the dark, when the city lights flickered outside the tall windows, she still wondered if she was anything more than a temporary warmth in his cold world. One night, when the first signs of spring softened the icy edge of the city, Ava woke with her head on Ethan's chest, listening to the slow, steady beat of his heart. She knew he was awake even before he spoke, his voice a rough whisper asking, "Do you ever regret it?" She shifted closer, her palm pressed flat against the thin cotton of his shirt, feeling the warmth that used to terrify him now, tethered to her like a secret. "No, I do not regret any of it," she said, but her voice trembled because part of her still wondered if he did. Sometimes she caught him staring out at the city, the weight in his eyes heavier than all the floors beneath their feet, as if the empire he carried would always pull him away from her. She wanted to believe that the man she touched in the dark was the same man who would stay when the lights returned. Then the letter came, a crisp white envelope slipped under their door without a stamp. No name, just a threat coiled in perfect script. Ava found it first. She held it so long that the paper turned damp in her grip. Ethan took it from her, read it once, then ripped it clean in half. But the damage lodged in the silence between them. She knew who it came from. Gregory was gone, but the people who fed on his scraps still circled, waiting for Ethan to slip back into the shadows he had lived in before her that night. He stood by the window long after she fell asleep. His hand pressed to the cold glass, the same way he had once touched his reflection when he believed there was nothing human left to save. Ava tried to pretend it would fade, but fear seeped into the small moments she treasured Ethan, pulling her close at dawn, his voice rough with sleep, asking if she wanted tea. Her laughter when he burned toast, because his mind was somewhere else the night she woke alone and found him on the balcony staring at the city that would never forgive him for choosing her over an heir born of convenience. She knew then that the fight was not over. Not really, because power cared nothing for truth. Only survival. When she found out she was pregnant, it did not feel real. At first, she sat on the cool bathroom floor, her back pressed to the cabinet, her fingers shaking around the cheap plastic stick. 2 lines blurred in the faint morning light. She thought of Ruth, thought of the promises she made, that she would never let this city eat her alive. She thought of Ethan, the way his hands trembled when he held her the first time they crossed that line between duty and desire. She did not know if he would want this. She did not know if she should keep it a secret for a while longer to protect them both, but secrets always find air to breathe. She barely had time to decide when Ethan found her curled on the edge of their bed. Her palm pressed flat against her stomach, as if she could will it invisible. He sank to his knees in front of her, his eyes wide, not with anger, but with something she could not name. His voice cracked when he said, "Is it true?" She could only nod. His hands covered hers. The warmth of his skin anchored her fear, but then his shoulders shook with a laugh that sounded too close to breaking. "I am not sterile," he whispered more to himself than to her. "I am not broken." Ava wanted to tell him that he had never been broken, that the parts they called ruined were the parts she loved most, but the words turned to tears. Instead, his mouth found hers. The promise between them sealed in salt and breath and the quiet heartbeat that fluttered inside her. She thought that would be the end of it, a new beginning built on truth and a tiny life that bound them to something bigger than the Roland name. But power hates to lose, and some debts demand blood over signatures. It happened fast, a black car that followed her from the clinic, a figure that cornered her in an empty garage, a hand that grabbed her arm and slammed her into concrete. She fought harder than she ever thought she could, teeth-bared fingers clawing at the wrist that pressed against her throat. She screamed Ethan's name, not because she thought he could hear her, but because it was the only word that gave her strength, the only name that meant home in a world that never gave her one. When Ethan found her, she was half-conscious, blood at her hairline, her coat torn open as if they had searched for proof that the child existed. His roar echoed through the underground, like a promise that no man, no shadow would touch her again. Ava woke in a hospital bed, the familiar antiseptic scent sharp in her lungs. She blinked against the harsh light. Ethan sat at her side, one hand gripping hers so tight it hurt his eyes, raw with fear and fury and something that looked dangerously close to love. "I failed you." He said the words ragged. "I let them come too close. I will never let that happen again." She wanted to tell him it was not his fault, that the city would always find ways to remind them what it thought she deserved. But when his lips pressed to her knuckles, all she could do was close her eyes and believe him. The doctors said the baby was safe. They said she would heal, but the fear lodged in her ribs like a splinter. She told Ethan she wanted to leave New York just for a while, just until she could breathe. Without looking over her shoulder, he refused, at first his pride bristling at the idea that the city he owned could drive him away. But when he felt her trembling under his palm, he packed a bag without another word. They left at dawn, before the city could wake, to witness its king walking away not with an heir born of contract, but with a girl from Brooklyn carrying a child born of an accident that had always been more than a mistake. They settled in a coastal town far enough that the skyline faded from memory. Ava learned to sleep through the night without the hum of traffic. Ethan learned how to cook badly, how to laugh when he burned toast again, how to fall asleep with his hand on her belly, feeling the tiny kicks that reminded him he was alive. She watched him rebuild himself piece by piece, not Roland the CEO, not Roland the broken heir, but Ethan, the man who pressed his ear to her stomach and whispered secrets to a heartbeat that did not yet have a name. But the city always calls back the same board that once turned on him, begged for his return, when Gregory's loyalists bled the company. Dry Ava sat with him under the shade of their porch, the ocean air tangling her hair as he told her he could fix it for good. This time, she knew he would go back. She knew he could not leave that part of himself buried forever. She took his hand, pressed it to her cheek, and told him if he went back, he would not go alone. This time, they would face it together, not as a bargain, not as a deal, but as a family. When they returned to New York, the papers wrote stories about the girl who touched the CEO and became his scandal, his ruin, his redemption. None of it mattered. Ruth was waiting at their door, her frail arms wrapped tight around Ava, then around Ethan, then trembling when she felt the tiny kicks beneath Ava's hand. She looked at Ethan with eyes that saw past the suits and the empire, and whispered, "Thank you for bringing her home to me." And when Ava lay in the hospital bed months later, sweat on her brow, Ethan's hand wrapped around hers as she brought their child into the world, she realized that sometimes the city does not eat you whole. Sometimes it teaches you how to fight for the small pieces of yourself worth saving. Sometimes it gives you back the things you thought were lost forever. In the hush of dawn, when their baby's first cry filled the room, Ava met Ethan's eyes and saw the truth they had both bled to find, that love was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be real. Ava stood by the wide window of their new apartment, watching the city lights flicker like restless stars below her feet. The baby slept in a crib beside her tiny breaths, soft as secrets in the hush of their quiet home behind her. Ethan moved through the shadows of the living room, his steps careful, as if afraid to wake the life they had fought so hard to protect. He stopped when he reached her, his hand warm on her shoulder, his voice rough with sleep, and something softer than sleep. "You should rest," he murmured. But Ava only leaned back into him, her eyes fixed on the street that once felt like a cage, now only a memory of what they had survived together. She thought of Brooklyn's cracked sidewalks, the nights she spent counting coins to buy her grandmother's medicine, the cold marble floors of Roland Medical, where her trembling hand had ruined everything and saved everything in the same heartbeat. She thought of the way Ethan had looked at her that first night, like a man staring at something he did not believe he deserved, and the way he looked at her now, like a man who knew he would spend forever earning every second of her forgiveness. They had paid for this life with secrets and truths, with nights spent holding on to each other when the world pressed too hard, and mornings spent believing that maybe some battles were worth fighting twice. Behind them, the crib creaked softly. The baby stirred, then settled again. Ethan's hand slid down her arm, his fingers lacing with hers, as if to remind them both that they were still here, still standing when so many things had tried to bury them. Ava turned her head just enough to see his eyes in the faint reflection on the glass. They were softer now, lined with exhaustion, but alive in a way she had never imagined when she first called him sir. Under the cold lights of a hospital corridor, she smiled a small, tired smile that carried every promise they had not spoken out loud. I used to think the city would eat me, she whispered, her breath fogging the glass for a heartbeat. I used to think I was too small to fight the world. Ethan pressed his lips to her temple, his voice a murmur against her hair. You never had to fight it alone, he said. Not anymore. Not ever again. Outside, the traffic hummed, the city kept moving, just as it always did. But inside their tiny world, time slowed, wrapped itself around their little family like a promise. Ava rested her palm on Ethan's chest, feeling the steady beat beneath her touch, remembering how once he had been afraid of that warmth, afraid of what it meant to want to be touched, to want to stay this close. She tipped her face up, her whisper. A vow in the dark. Promise me one thing, she said, promise me. No matter how hard it gets, you will never let the world decide who we are. Ethan's laugh was low, soft. Like the first spring thaw after a cruel winter, he touched her cheek the way he always did now, without flinching, without walls. Just a man loving a woman who had once been a mistake in a hallway. You have my word, he said, and she knew he meant it, not just tonight, not just until the next storm, but for every storm after this. When Ava finally lay down beside him, the baby's soft breaths between them, she closed her eyes to the quiet hum of their home, and for the first time in her life, she did not dream of running. She dreamed of staying, of fighting, of loving a man who had once believed himself broken and proving him wrong every single day. And as sleep tugged her under, she thought of the words she would tell her child one day, words she wished someone had told her long ago, that sometimes the world will try to tell you who you are, but love will always whisper back, you get to choose for yourself.